Hey everyone, Jake Lloyd-Bacon here.
Along with Paul Bianchi.
And Alexandra Hoy.
Hey, we all host different shows on Dragon Wagon Radio.
We do, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
Not at all. We are here to talk about Dungeons and Dragon Wagon,
a narrative podcast series in which we venture into a mythical land for a D&D inspired role-playing game.
Alexandra and I are joined by Matt Hinksman and a very special guest of quest for each chapter of an epic saga in which we must take on the roles of half-orcs, dark elves, and more as we fight our way through a fantastical land of peril, drama, and often hilarity.
All of which is controlled by me, the Dungeon Master, and the player's chance rolls of the die.
And our show is for everyone. Even if you know nothing about D&D or role-playing games, we've got you covered.
That's right. Our game sessions are highly edited, easy to follow, sound designed from top to bottom, and completely immersive.
Yeah, our episodes sound more like a well-produced radio drama than an RPG show.
So what are you waiting for? Join the adventure on Dungeons and Dragon Wagon at dndwpod.com or wherever you find great podcasts.
It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Steven Sabel.
Hello, Quillers, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Don't Quill the Messenger, brought to you by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. Today in studio with me, I have a very special guest. His name is Christopher Karbo. He is a Los Angeles actor with a degree from
Viterbo University.
Viterbo University, thank you, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He is an accomplished actor and has played many Shakespearean roles, including Mark Antony, Macbeth, and Hamlet, and many others. And he is here today to talk to me about knowledge of the canon, what it means to know and learn the 37 plays, the epic poems, the 154 sonnets from a performer's perspective, from an actor's perspective. I will entice him into some gentle conversation about our Lord of Oxford. But most importantly, we want to get a perspective, Chris, of what it's like to be studying the canon in the way that you're doing it right now. And I want you to explain to the listeners what's happening. And obviously it's due in part to the situation that we're all living beneath through the COVID pandemic, and how that is changing theater, how that is changing scholarship, and how that's changing our interaction with each other. So you are a part of a group that is going through the entire canon. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's called Shakespeare 2020 LA. And it is a schedule set up by Ian Desher for working your way through the entire canon, which is something that I had never done. Like, I've worked on a number of the plays and I've studied them in depth, but I'd always meant to go through all of it. And this seemed like a good way to go about that.
Now, who is Ian Desher?
Ian Desher.
Yeah, who is that?
He is an author. I'd have to look it up, but I believe he wrote the Shakespeare Star Wars book.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
I've read those. Those are actually quite good.
Yes. And I'm terrible because he actually joined one of our Zoom meetings about a month ago, just to, chat with the group, because it's not, the overall idea isn't highly organized in the sense of you necessarily have to do this. It's essentially just a schedule. It's available to anyone of a way to methodically go through the entire list without trying to sit down and do it in a weekend.
But there are groups all over the country currently right now who are following his schedule.
Absolutely.
And who are embarking upon this quest during this lockdown situation, this social distancing, stay home, stay safe pandemic issue.
Yeah.
Where they're using this time as a means to pursue the works, to get to know them all, literally all.
Yes.
And they're doing them under his formula. Is that basically?
That is correct. And it's interesting because the nature of the pandemic developed after the fact. This was already planned for 2020. We started in January, as I was telling colleagues of mine. It was essentially a book club. We would get together, usually on a Saturday afternoon, early evening, and we'd be following the schedule and read whatever was next on the schedule. We had a number of free readings open to the public at libraries. We actually only got to do one of them, and then the lockdown was imposed the day before what was going to be our second. So it morphed at that point. Like, that was never part of the plan. We were just going to get together on the weekends, the occasional library reading, and go through the whole thing. And then suddenly we find ourselves, as we've all found ourselves, in this situation of being at home. And the first couple of weeks were kind of, everyone's trying to figure everything out. And then there was that moment of, hey, there's nothing that keeps us from moving forward the way everyone else has, finding a way to make it happen. So we started doing Zoom-based
Is that the
meetings.
platform you're using, or you're using the Zoom?
Yes, we're using Zoom.
The Zoom app, the Zoom platform.
Yes. And I know that the person who's running the tech for our group, he mentions it every time, and I just can't think of the name right now, borrowed the idea from another group that he knew. And clearly, I mean, it's something that now, in the same way that people latched onto the schedule and were forming groups to read through everything, are doing the same thing. Because I know I have several friends, I can think of at least 2 others who are doing a similar thing, where it's a virtual staged reading.
And in fact, I know of 2 others as well, and I think they might even be the same 2 others that you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's how I know that this is happening in various places throughout the country, and it's also happening across state lines too. So like your group is specifically an LA group.
Yes.
But I know of some people who are involved in groups that have participants in different states throughout the union. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the advantages of the Zoom platform that you wouldn't have if you were meeting at somebody's home or at a library or
Absolutely.
whatever. And so that's an interesting aspect to it. I think that you now have actors who are getting a chance to at least interact and share their craft together from a distance, from a great distance in some cases. Mm-hmm. I don't know that it's a substitute. I'm sure the members of your group, and I'd be curious to talk to you about that a little bit more, but
right.
But I would guess that the members of your group would say it was much better when we got together at somebody's house or at the library, and we were all in the same room together, and we were all sharing this text together within our 6 feet.
I would hazard a guess that the answer to that is yes. I certainly don't want to speak for the entire group, but I know for a fact that I feel that way.
Sure.
So
sure. But before we
at least one of them feels that way.
Before we get into that like transition, though, yep. I am curious, and I'm gonna guess that a great number of our listeners are curious. Is what was the first piece? What does the list say you're supposed to start with?
Oh no!
What did you start with?
What did we start with? I know the first one we did for Zoom, but that was not. We'd already done several.
Right. So what was the beginning of the list? Was it one of the plays? Was it?
It was one of the plays.
Okay.
I'm terrible. Henry IV, Part 1.
Henry IV 1.
I think that was
followed immediately by Henry IV 2.
Yes.
And then Henry V, or no?
No, we haven't gotten to Henry V yet.
Okay, that's interesting.
He has an interesting order, and I just looked this up. I'm going to be paraphrasing because I looked it up 2 weeks ago, which in today's day and age might as well have been 10 years ago in someone else's memory.
That's very true.
But
they're all blurs days to me.
Originally, he picked the order somewhat arbitrarily from, I believe, the Riverside, whatever order they had, and then he selected a few so that they would fall at an appropriate time. So that Julius Caesar would be
there was a timeline as well to this, starting in January 2020.
Correct.
Okay, I didn't realize that there was a plan that he gave you as far as when to read them as well.
It's a weekly schedule.
Oh, wow.
For the entire year. And what's interesting, we've gotten a little bit ahead of it because we'll do a reading now on a Sunday, whereas for the longer plays, it may be scheduled for a week and a half or 2, and we've just done it. So I think we're strangely, like, we're about caught up because there were the few that we missed while we were figuring everything out. But now we're banging it out in a 4.5 hour session, as opposed to taking the entire week that is available, or a week and a half for a particular piece, depending on the length.
So the first play was
Henry IV Part 1.
Henry IV 1, then Henry IV 2.
Yes.
What was the first Zoom play?
Hamlet.
Sorry. Who got to read The Prince?
That would be me.
Oh, go figure.
Yes.
Just to be fair to the audience, when Chris played Hamlet, it was under my direction for the Archway Theater in North Hollywood. So that's why I'm laughing, is that he's a brilliant Hamlet. He's the best Hamlet I've ever seen. And
that's very kind of you.
That had very little to do with my input. But anyway, that just makes me laugh. Of course. Well, why wouldn't they? I don't know the other members of your group, but I don't know why they would choose someone else.
Well, you actually do know one of them, and this is going to mean nothing to your audience, but the organizer of this entire group is Mary, who played Gertrude.
Okay, so here you were reuniting as Gertrude and Hamlet together for this reading.
And actually Taylor Mars involved as well and was reprising.
He reprised. Oh, so
yes.
You had 3. Wow, so he was Laertes.
Yes, he was.
Oh, so this was like a, Archway Theater production of Hamlet mini reunion. Okay, well that's great, and I'm sure that must have served well for the reading. Being that familiar with the text already,
yes,
is not learning the text,
or
for
at least the parts
time.
that weren't cut.
Sure, okay, touche. Very good. That's true. P.S. Nobody but Kenneth Branagh puts on Hamlet in its entirety anymore, ever.
4 hours.
Yeah, God. And but you're committed when you sign up for this. You're committed to read every word, beginning to end.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting because there are a few others that I'll be curious to see if you've hit them yet and what the running time was on them. So that's not a terrible one to start off with Zoom either, though. I mean, the length, yes, but
the familiarity,
sure,
and accessibility to people. I mean, it would be. I think it would have been much harder if it was something more obscure, or honestly, something not as good.
Now, outside of the library presentations that you had, the one that you did,
we did the one,
and the other ones that you had scheduled.
Yes.
Is there any ability for anyone outside of the group to be able to view these Zoom gatherings, these Zoom meetings?
Yes, we have a YouTube channel.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay. Are you doing it YouTube live or?
We have not
with Zoom at the same time. Like, what format is that?
We haven't done any of them live yet.
Okay.
That was the plan. And then we all, I think, reasonably said, hey, we haven't done this before, so let's record the first couple. And I think we're comfortable with that because even with the text in front of you and even with the freedom to take all day if we needed to, there's
please don't.
Believe me. There are still those moments where, as beautiful as it is, trying to get all of those words out in the right order with 100% accuracy is a tall order.
Even with the script in front of you.
Yes.
It's difficult to do. It's true.
Well, unless you're committed to making it take all day. If you do it slowly.
Oh, no, that's
you can. But if you do it with any amount of conversational speed or faster, you get tongue-tied every once in a while.
Sure.
It happens.
Sure.
So we have that ability.
Does anyone at the start of these, is anyone like leading a warm-up of any kind with the actors, or actors expected to do their own like personal warm-ups ahead of time as far as vocally, facially?
Yeah, the expectation is that any vocal warm-up is done beforehand.
Okay.
We generally take 5 or 10 minutes before to discuss getting into the right headspace. And to be fair, I mean, we do have one rehearsal where we just talk through making sure, as you are familiar, even now, even we're doing the whole thing, we don't have enough actors to cast individually for every single part. So a lot of it's going
some
through.
of those productions you'd need like 50 people on this Zoom meeting.
Yes. So we have usually the Friday before we will get together for a couple of hours and talk through and make sure that every part is covered. We do some, we'll layer in some sound effects. So make sure all of that is working. So, and then we'll talk through, and it is a staged reading in the sense that, yes, we're all sitting in whatever setup you have at home and we have the script in front of us, but it also, there is intention behind it. It's not simply just rote reading. So there have been some discussions about the overall context of the play and just making sure that everyone, well, pun intended, is on the same page.
Okay, so getting to that, this is the next question that I'm curious about is everyone using the same version?
Yes.
Oh, that's important. I think that's super important. Which version is it?
Folger.
The Folger version?
Yes.
Okay, so each member of the group knows that they need to be prepared and have their copy of the Folger version.
That is correct.
Of the script in hand. Now, why the Folger version? Any particular reason other than it's just easy to hold and it's a relatively inexpensive paperback?
I'm going to go with option 2. I don't believe this has explicitly been said, and they don't pay me or sponsor me at all, and I would still plug this anyway. The Folger library makes all of the texts available online in a Word doc, in PDF, in text format. You can download all of the plays right now. So I believe it's from the practicality of we can forward the PDF to everyone. And we all have the same script. Yes.
Sure, that's absolutely convenient. And
yes.
So literally everyone is on the same page.
Yes.
I know in my years of directing Shakespearean productions, the actors would always ask, well, which version are we going by? Or, what script are we using? Or I want to go out and get this, or are we using this one? Or can I show up with my own? No, everyone needs to have the exact same script. So when I edit, as you know, the first rehearsals are everybody open your book.
Yeah, get out your pencil.
Get out your pencil. Cross out this line, starting with this line on this page through this line on this page, moving to the next page, and that's an arduous task, but it's important that then in the rehearsal process, you're able to go turn to page 16, line 5, start there.
Yep.
And everybody has the same page 16 and the same line 5.
Mm-hmm.
It's crucially important. So that's interesting that even in the Zoom context, it's important that everybody still have the same script, the same page.
Yes.
Okay, but it's not just the plays, and that's something that really intrigues me too. So tell me about, have you done anything other than the plays in this lineup that you've been provided that you're following?
Yes, we have. We've done Venus and Adonis. We have done, and I was just about to say, speaking of the Folger, so far the only exceptions were The Passionate Pilgrim. And escaping me right now.
Rape of Lucrece?
No, that you can get that in the Folger. We did that.
Okay.
Phoenix and the Turtle.
Phoenix and the Turtle, sure.
So those were just like, okay, someone found the text online and sent us all the links, so we had the same thing. But yes, we've been doing that. We did the sonnets.
All in one night?
No, we broke that up over. It's split in half.
Okay.
So in one night we did the what is it
154.
54. So it was like 80 the first night, and then the remainder
74
for the next week.
Okay, that's interesting. I wonder how that was decided, like where that cutoff is. That'd be very interesting. And from an Oxfordian perspective, I have to tell you, like Oxfordians listening right now are going, ooh, why there? What does that mean? Who made that decision? Because the sonnets are a big thing for trying to discover who this author really is.
Yes. And
I'm curious, when you're reading them like you were, was it your first experience really with like the sonnets, or other than like a high school English teacher? Or?
It was my first experience with the sonnets as a whole. I've read individually or pieces, but it was the first time that I had ever tried to sit down and read through all of them, or broken up over 2 nights. in high school and college, there would be those that were assigned and those we would focus on. But this was the first time I was trying to go through all of it.
What was that like for you?
This was challenging, and I'm hesitant. I doubt any of my virtual castmates will be listening to the podcast, but I found the online format itself to be challenging, more so than being in person.
So the Zoom aspect of it was much more difficult with covering the sonnets than it was with, say, doing one of the plays.
Yes.
Was that because of the fact that most of the participants were not as familiar with the sonnets as they were with the plays?
Yes. I think there are two main components, and I am just as guilty of a lack of familiarity. And because this was better with the sonnets. Actually, we did
Phoenix and Turtle,
the
Passionate Pilgrim.
Thank you. The Passionate Pilgrim.
Yes.
We did that about 2 weeks ago or so.
Okay.
And that was more challenging because of the structure. In order, essentially to make sure that not someone who wanted to show up to participate isn't just sitting there watching someone read. The order of assignment makes it challenge. Now, with the sonnets, we would just rotate through. Each of us would get one, but we didn't really have a pre-assigned order. So it was disconnected from a through line standpoint. Whether or not it wouldn't have to be me. I think I might get more of it if just one person was reading either all of them or a single night, as opposed, or even a chunk, that there would feel more connection. So I kind of feel like I was even partially involved in the ones that I was doing because I was essentially cold reading them.
Sure. And when were they assigned to you? And they were, so with the sonnets, say 10, just to use a round number, 10 actors,
yes,
154 sonnets. They're each doing 15 sonnets, and you have 4 left over. Is that sort of the way it was done?
Yes, and it wasn't pre-assigned in the sense of,
and in a rotation.
And
I think that's problematic, and I'm wondering if you found this to be problematic because many people will argue, regardless of whether they're a Stratfordian, an Oxfordian, or whoever, many people will argue that there are 3 voices in the sonnets, 3 characters represented there. And it would be difficult to get that and to understand the relationship and the connections of those characters if you have 10 voices.
Yes, you have 10 voices. And by the luck of the order, those 10 voices are split across the rest. So it's not even like the internal 3 is consistently one person.
Sure.
It's just whoever comes up in the rotation. And from a practical standpoint, for me, the only way you can really successfully cold read is when you have a moment where you're not speaking, is to scan ahead. So I was definitely falling into, okay, well, there's 9 more people before me. Count it down. Keep an ear open for, where everyone's saying so I don't get lost, but just scanning through it quickly and making sure that there's not something that I think is going to catch me up. So I'm listening, but I'm not listening with the full attention that I would if I had more familiarity. So honestly, I feel like I absolutely have to go back and read the ones that I wasn't reading at the time.
Yes.
But also reading the ones that I did read at the time, because I said those words, but I was very focused on not getting completely lost in the words. And therefore I wasn't commanding my attention the way that I really feel it.
After you've done that, we'll have to have you back on the program for another episode to discuss what you find there and what your interpretation is there, and if you see and recognize the 3 entities that are represented there and what that means to you as somebody coming to the sonnets new in that way.
Yeah.
Because I think that would be very interesting. It would be very interesting to me, but I think it would also be very interesting to our listeners, who many whom are listening know the sonnets so well and are now desensitized to what it was like to come upon them.
And are going to send you all kinds of nasty emails about how could he do this and have no idea about
maybe, but I would disagree, because I would think that the majority of people out there who are interested in the Shakespeare authorship question, regardless of what their belief is, believe that more people need to be interested in the Shakespeare authorship question, and that the sonnets hold a very important clue to the answer to that question, and would like to see more people like yourself engaging in the sonnets in a more thoughtful way like this. So I think that, I think people would encourage that this needs to be happening more. So that's why I asked you about it. Phoenix and Turtle, Passionate Pilgrim, I don't even know how you can break those up into voices, because those are the voices of the poet. Those poems are the voice of the poet, and they are specifically aimed at specific meaning, that it would be really weird to have like 10 voices reading that poem. Either of those poems.
Those two experiences were both
short, at least.
Yes, they were short. Magnanimous in assignment and making sure that everybody had something to do, but it got down to like, oh, you read these 4, you read these 7, whatever. Where like the natural, well, no one can see me making the air quotes, but the natural breaks was so disconnected that it was, even for me, with the words in front of me, participating, a challenge to follow the thought, to follow the through line.
That's unfortunate, and the one thing I would hope is that the participants were intrigued enough by the work that they then went back and read it on their own independently, to try to interpret it, to see the beauty of the language, to get some of the themes and messages of the address that is within, especially the Phoenix and the Turtle, which is such great imagery. You know, the fiery rise from the ashes phoenix and the gentle turtle dove are such contrasts. And there's so much symbolism involved in that I would hope that they would all go back and pursue that further. And, you know, if you're out there listening and you haven't read these poems, go find them, read them, and do this same thing.
They're both online.
They're
Google
absolutely
will find them for you very quickly.
Yes, very easy to find. I'd like to go to Venus and Adonis, because that was that was the first work published under the name of William Shakespeare. And I have had the pleasure of producing a performance of that poem with 3 voices: Venus, Adonis, and the storyteller. And I think it works extremely well as a 3-person performance. And so there again, I find it curious that what it must be like to try to separate that up into 10 people, because if Venus suddenly has 3 different voices, it's really hard to pinpoint who Venus is, this seductress that she is in the poem.
Right.
This very salacious seductress in the poem. And Adonis, this very obstinate and impertinent young man, anxious to go after the boar. And then the sadness of the narrator, the storyteller, who has to explain to the audience what happens when these two meet and how tragically the outcome results. I don't know how that would play with, 10 different voices.
I should probably plead the 5th.
So it wasn't the best.
No, honestly, I've been very pleased with the plays and the experience of that, and reading those and getting through, including those that I have done before and those that I haven't. The remainder of the things that we have done, the sonnets, the additional poems, I have found more challenging, just because I feel like there's that, in the effort to make sure that no one's just sitting there not having nothing to do. It's not easy to
inclusivity. I get that.
Whereas it's easier with the play because it's written in there. Here's your character's name. When you see that name, you say these words. That's how this gimmick works. We all understand that. Sometimes you've got larger parts, sometimes you've got smaller parts, but that doesn't exist there. It's easy, I think, to fall into the, well, oh yes, here are, the individual breaks, we'll just rotate through that. So to be inclusive, that's useful, but I do feel that the work suffers for it.
I'll make a secret confession to you and the 5 people who are listening to this podcast right now.
Yeah.
I start every rehearsal process with a read through of the play.
Yes.
And 1, to give the cuts in cases where there are cuts, but 2, just to begin that process, to get everybody familiar with who's playing what parts and what the storyline is from beginning to end in chronological order. But I always secretly hope that at that first rehearsal, there'll be at least one actor who can't make it to that rehearsal so that I get to read that part, so that I don't have to just sit there with nothing to do but listen to the play. And so I totally understand that you want to make sure that everybody who's a part of the group gets a chance to participate and be a part of the presentation. I totally get that.
Otherwise, I'll do something else with my Sunday afternoon and watch it when it rolls out on YouTube.
Sure, that totally makes sense. But I do think that I can see from my knowledge of those poems particularly and the sonnets, how difficult that could be to try to absorb and really interpret what you're reading there and what you're hearing there when it's broken up like that.
Yep.
And certainly the plays lend themselves much better to multiple voices and character choices and those kinds of things. So I'm curious about, which play have you done so far in this series that you were less familiar with, that has now changed you or moved you or made you think, oh, wow, I want to actually perform in that play now, or I want to actually play one of those roles that I haven't played yet?
I'll go with 2, and I'm going to cheat and not directly answer your question.
Okay.
In the sense that
happens here all the time.
Yeah. One of them I have done. Well, I've been involved in. And then the other I was clearly familiar with, but it's the first time that I connected to it and I'm interested in some capacity with Lear. Like, obviously I was aware of it as a thing, but it was never really on the list. I was like, yes, King Lear, great, wonderful. But it didn't really speak to me. But now I'm, feel a deeper connection to that now. And
so many great potential roles for you in that show too.
Yeah. And then the second one is a show that we've all seen so many times, but we just did 2 weeks ago, we did Midsummer.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And I was like, all right, maybe there's some stuff here that I hadn't noticed before, given the circumstances of the one time that I did it was under duress.
Under duress. With your arm tied behind your back.
Yes. And
your life held hostage.
Yes.
Yeah. What he's referring to is a production that I directed where my Demetrius suddenly had another commitment and couldn't do a weekend. Was it a weekend of shows?
It was a weekend.
Yeah, could not do a weekend of scheduled performances, and Chris had to come and fill in with 3 rehearsals and like a day's notice. So wasn't Helena out the same weekend? Yes,
or one show.
We had a replacement Helena.
So both Sarah and I were there. We're both looking at each other like, we're new tonight. Thumbs up. Let's see how this goes.
And it was fine and it went great, but I could see where you missed the whole rehearsal process. You missed all of the insight into the production, the different relationship levels. I totally get that. So, but after reading it this way with this group, what's the role? What?
Oberon.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Of course. Yeah. Well,
I wish I could come up with something that would be even remotely surprising to anyone who vaguely knows me, but Oberon.
But I also, and anybody else who's listening who does vaguely know you, and they're going to agree when I say this, you'll get these emails. I'd like to see your bottom. I'd like to see you.
Well, that seems very impertinent.
Well, it was probably improper for me to say I want to see your bottom, but I'd like to see you perform that role.
We'll see what we'll see.
And Lear, so what? Okay, did you read Oberon as in the group when they assigned roles? Did they give you Oberon to read?
Yes.
Okay, so then that also obviously means one of the reasons why you'd like to connect further with that part.
Right, is that I just read it and I was like, oh, yeah,
this guy's cool.
I'd like to take I would like to take a more in-depth swing at this.
Sure.
Rather than essentially cold reading it, plus, having seen it a number of times. Like, it wasn't alien to me, but I'd never, it's been years since I actually sat down and read the text itself, and never for Oberon. So it was like, cold read adjacent.
Well, we talk on this program a lot about that play, obviously, because it's the most popular of the plays. It's the most popularly produced. It's been produced more times than any other Shakespeare play.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the reasons for that is because it's so easily accessible.
Yes.
And the storyline is easy to follow. The language is beautiful and flowery, but it's not difficult.
Correct. And it's a story
to absorb
that everyone can understand and relate to. And one thing that I noticed of all that we've gone through thus far, most of it can remain intact. There aren't big swaths of it that like, yeah, no one understands this reference. The scene is utterly useless. Not that there isn't stuff to be cut from it, but it seems like it's shorter to begin with.
Yes.
And there aren't the big sections of like, oh yes, this was very relevant to a modern audience then, but is zero relevance or understanding to an audience now. Out you go.
There is some of that. And
yes.
And definitely, most scholars will say that it's the most satirical of the plays in the canon. And many argue, and I would be one of them, that there's no way a provincial guy who was not privileged in some way would have gotten away with writing that play and presenting it before the queen unless he had some kind of special credential, because there's a lot of biting satire in there about the queen and her at one time proposed marriage to the Duke of Alençon, who is the Frenchman that is being lampooned by Bottom and the other characters throughout the play.
Mm-hmm.
And the argument being, you'd lose your head for that kind of thing. But this guy did not apparently lose his head for writing this play. But Oberon is a big part of that too, because Oberon is the one saying, well, if you want to be in love with this stupid French ass,
yeah,
kind of thing,
go right ahead.
Right.
Let me help you.
He's very much the storyteller character in that sense, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So that it doesn't surprise me you would want to connect to that character. So when you guys did Lear, what part did you read for Lear?
I feel like I should shut up now because I read Lear. It's like, everybody, yeah, sometimes you have large parts,
Ladies
sometimes you have
and
smaller parts.
Christopher Karbo,
I actually have all
Shakespeare's
of the large parts.
Leading Man. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But, did you get all the leading parts? Every single one? Okay, okay.
No, we just happen to be talking about the leading parts that I've had thus far.
Well, I don't, with all due fairness, Oberon is a great role, but it is not the leading role in the play.
No.
That play is very ensemblic in nature, and I don't know that you could even really name a leading role. Puck seems to be the leader of the play.
Yes.
And mainly because he's the character who also comes and talks directly to the audience. But I don't know that, and I haven't looked at the line counts, but they're pretty even from what I recall for most of the characters. In fact, I think Helena has one of the largest line counts.
Yeah.
Because she has monologues.
Mm-hmm.
Puck has large line counts because he has monologues. So I think it's probably one of the most well-rounded, most ensemblic of the plays. And the comedies tend to be, too, which is why you don't have a title character in the comedies.
Right.
So those two are two that you're like, okay, I'd like to look at them and visit them again. Anything in the canon that you have broached so far that you're like, never again?
Yes.
How did that get here?
Yes. I don't believe that I'd ever read The Comedy of Errors.
You don't like The Comedy of Errors?
No. there's
Okay, definitely an early comedy
there's
in my mind.
there's a line for me, which is what I'm about to say is so utterly hypocritical, because there's plenty of dumb comedy that amuses me, but this was just too much. There were too many layers of just, oh, I'm not going to see the thing that's in front of me, or I'm not going to stop for a single second. And a lot of comedy is hinged on that. The second somebody stops to think, it all falls apart. It has to be moving at such a breakneck pace that people are they're missing connections. They're making dumb choices that you're like, wait, if you just look at this person, like, clearly this other, what is happening makes no sense. Like, if anybody stops for just a second, they could clear up the entire.
It's very zany.
Yes.
Like the true definition, the commedia definition
Yes.
of the zany characters, where we get that word from. And it is, I think, one of the earlier comedies, especially with that mechanism. But there are some wonderful moments that are brilliant in their metaphor.
Mhm.
I love when the Dromio, which I can't remember which Dromio it is, but he's talking about the maid who is like chasing him and wants to
Yes.
and he's like, she's spherical like a globe.
Yes.
And that whole sequence right there is some of the most clever, hilarious writing.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, but that's not necessarily the question that you asked.
No.
Because
There's no role in there that you're like, ooh, I want to play that role.
Well, and so far it's the only one that I've been like, I don't like this story. Like, if I'm watching this, I might be sitting in the audience angry. Now, to be fair, I experience that a lot. So, I'm coming out with a little bit of bias.
A harsh critic.
I'm a harsh critic, and also a tall gentleman, and theater seats are not designed for us. So you really got to be entertaining me. Or I'm like,
I agree. This better be good if you want me to sit here with my knees wrapped around my ears for the rest of the 2 hours ahead of me.
Yeah. My bottom's ass has gone to sleep, so get me out of here.
Okay. Which one? Which else? So you said more than one, though. Comedy of Errors and what else?
So, and to your point of, like, in Comedy of Errors, there are moments. I think some of the language in Love's Labor's Lost is beautiful, and some of the interactions, but as a whole, the whole thing is going on, and then we get to the end, and I'm like, what just happened, and why do I care? Oh, I don't.
So I'll tell you, the only reason why I enjoy Love's Labor's Lost is because I'm an Oxfordian. And it's because I can see the play and know the references in it, and know that there's no way that the author could have inserted these references if he didn't have this sort of knowledge that could only then point to this guy. Like, that's one of the few reasons why I can enjoy that play, because I agree with you. It's not a very good play. And it gets weird when it doesn't need to.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about, you mentioned Midsummer not having too many moments where a modern audience of today would look at it and scratch their head and go, huh?
Right.
Because it was meant for the audience of its time in, 1580s, 1590s when it was written. Love's Labor's Lost is more so like that than I think most of the other plays are. I think that play was specifically written for its court audience.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the public performance history is of the play without consulting one of my many books on the shelf. But I doubt that it was very well received by anyone who didn't understand or didn't know why he was inserting these specific references and these specific jokes and these specific characters that were modeled after real people that he was mocking. I think that play really is a specific target piece in many ways. And if you don't know all of that, it would be very difficult to enjoy, I think. So I don't knock you for that one. Comedy of Errors is just plain silly fun, though.
Yeah, it just took it too far for me. 2 sets of twins. 2 sets of twins. You get away with 1 set of twins. particularly when the second set of twins knows the first set exists, is actively searching for them, and then wondering why people are confusing them with, wait, I didn't do that. Why would you think that? Oh, maybe I finally found the exact copy or version of me that I've been looking for.
But if you do that too soon, then you don't get the whole jealousy and the wives thing. You don't get the whole reuniting with their mother. You don't get the whole Aegeus finding Amelia and everybody living like, come on. It's only suspension of disbelief.
Harsh critic.
Okay, so those two are off your list. That's good to know. Were there any that you've done that when it was over, you went, wow, I never really knew how good this play is, even if it wasn't, hey, this is a play I want to do or a role I really want to play?
I definitely felt that way about Lear.
Sure.
Beyond that, not that I can think of offhand. I did enjoy the Henry Fours, both of them, but I don't know. So I suppose then, yes, I came away with a new appreciation because there was a little bit of a vacuum there for me of not having a really strong opinion.
No Falstaff in your future for you?
I guess that remains to be seen.
But not like on your bucket list of, yeah, I definitely want to put this on my list and play this role.
No.
You're a bit tall for Falstaff.
Yeah.
That could be an issue.
Yeah, the list. I have been very fortunate and have had the opportunity to play most of the characters that I've wanted to play that are on the list. So it has been getting shorter. I guess I've got 2 new ones based on this, Oberon and Lear down the road. Yeah.
Well, you have time for Lear.
A little bit.
You could take your time. Although I'm convinced
by the time you're old enough to play Lear, you're too old to play Lear.
I have a feeling that may be very true. And so I have a formula for trying to overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my gift to you right here in this episode, which is start memorizing his lines now.
Right.
So that when you are old enough to play Lear,
they're already there. The work is done.
They're at least in there somewhere.
Yes.
They've been in there before. You can access that data. It's available. Because the truth of the matter is, and I'm sure we have listeners who are older listeners who know this and acknowledge this, and I've seen this in older actors that I've worked with. The memory does take longer later, especially with dialogue, especially with lines. And the bigger it is, the harder it is, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like, I do know, I've heard recently that they're doing an age-neutral version of Hamlet coming up, and that Sir Ian McKellen is going to play Hamlet at the age of 78 years old, I think he is.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I just heard about that.
It may be that he's like, forget you, Sarah Bernhardt.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it older than you.
Forget this, like, I'm Ian McKellen. I'm going to do what I want. More power to it. I would love to see that.
I hope he can learn the lines. He has played it before. I know, like it's not like it's never been there. Maybe he'll be able to access it in there somewhere. Be like, ooh, I remember that's where that is. But you've done it. I've done it. We know, like we both know how hard it is.
Yeah.
I don't know that I can imagine. I don't know that I would try to do it now, and I'm not yet 50.
Yeah.
So at 70, like, wow.
Yeah. Well, and then also Hamlet is singular because you've got that little chunk at the beginning that you don't have anything to do. Then you come out on stage and you're just out on stage and out on stage and out on stage. Then you get another big break. You get little tiny little breaks in there. Then you get one uncomfortably large break. And then you come back out and take it to the end.
Yep.
The rest it's a marathon. Breaks built in for human beings. I mean, Lear disappears for nearly an entire act.
Yes.
And even in his big chunks, we'll have like a scene or two in between. Yes, still not trying to diminish the challenge of that, but I'm still going to go back to Hamlet is singular in that department of just trying to cram all of those words into your consciousness.
That had to be a very difficult experience, because I remember when we started the Hamlet rehearsals, even cut down to my cutting.
Yeah.
Which is, as you know, 2 hours and 40 minutes. Even then, I recall you having some discomfort in that first read through, in that we're all just sitting there listening to you.
Yeah.
For a long time, for half of that 2 hours and 40 minutes, at least an hour and 20 minutes is Hamlet talking.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been really weird to be doing a 4-hour uncut version and being that guy and having to deliver that 1,500 and something plus lines uncut, that I think 1,580 something lines, I think, uncut. That had to be a bit strange. Were people like, I'm going to go get a sandwich and I'll be back? Like, how did that work out?
I'm not actually sure, because that was our first.
Sure.
So it was also me in my 1-bedroom apartment by myself. So yes, I'm the actor, but I'm also the sound engineer and the DP and the tech guy. So I'm trying to keep all of these things, making sure that I'm sitting in frame and trying to watch out of my peripheral vision, who's on the screen. But then I've got the script over here. So it was it wasn't for entirely different reasons, but it wasn't entirely unlike doing it, of like, okay, this evening I'm going to play the role. I begin by pushing the snowball, and then at some point it comes to a rest as just this giant boulder of snow at the bottom of the hill. That at the end of that, I had that moment of like, I'm not exactly sure what just happened, but here I am in my apartment drenched in sweat.
Right? Because even sitting still, I mean, that's the thing. Like, he's the most active, inactive character ever.
Mm-hmm.
And even just sitting still, putting the energy into it, delivering those words, saying those lines, is exhausting.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an incredible thing that I think.
And I was very grateful to be able to do it again, and also finally actually get to say all of the words out loud.
Every single one of them. Sure.
Yeah. So I was very grateful that, Mary had asked me to do it, but that still, it was challenging at the time. I feel like I've gotten more comfortable with okay, now I get, and I'm a reasonably technically proficient person, particularly when it comes to computers. So I wasn't worried about that going into it. It was just the oddity of trying to do it all at once. And it's clearly not like being on stage where you have an audience. There is no audience, but it's also not even like making a film, because even then there's someone running the camera. There's a director. There's people milling about. It's so weird to be by yourself doing this, something like that. And the other people are there on the screen, but it was a bit overwhelming at the time. And yeah, I don't really know where that thought was going, other than
what's left on the list what do you know is coming? What plays are left? Is this supposed to take the whole year? So
yes,
you're only halfway through what the list is.
Yeah,
then?
we're just past half the way.
I'm curious how he turned it into 52 weeks. 37 plays, 2 nights of sonnets. That's 39. The 4 major poems is 43.
Well, keep in mind, but it's not just necessarily 1 week. Like, I think for Hamlet, you had 2 full weeks.
Oh, okay, I see.
Schedule.
Okay.
So it's not the same amount of time. Most of the plays you are allotted a week, but for the longer ones, Hamlet. For Lear, I think it was maybe 2
Sure.
or a week and some change.
That would make sense.
Yeah. So that's how the spacing works out. It's not they aren't all given equal weight because they don't take the same amount of time.
Of course not. So what's next? What's coming up next for you?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I just saw the email about it yesterday, and I can't think of it right now because they just did Merchant on Sunday,
Oh, okay.
which I was in the car, so
You missed it.
I missed it.
They didn't ask you to play Shylock.
They did not.
Okay.
But I let them know that I was going to be unavailable.
Sure.
So, and wow, I'm totally blanking.
So you don't know what's coming.
Right
How
this-
about some of the ones that are left on the list that you know are left on the list you haven't gotten to?
Well, we still haven't gotten to Henry V.
Okay.
We have.
That's a curious thing to me that the 4s would be the first 2 and then 5 would be so far away.
Yeah. What else is still on the list? I'm also forgetting because there was that like 2.5-3 week period that we missed. So I think we missed and haven't gone back to King John.
It's a great piece. It's so underrated and so underproduced. I'll be curious to hear what you feel about John after you've read it and gone through it.
Yeah, I'm going to have to make some time and go back for that.
The role of Constance particularly is just a heart-wrenching role.
We haven't gotten to Coriolanus.
Oh, okay. That's a role for you.
I accept. I don't,
okay, good to know.
I'm trying to think what we have.
Any of those that you're like really looking forward to because they're going to be new titles to you?
There are some that are new titles. And here's the thing, I'm not sure. That's kind of the exciting part of the adventure of those that I'm not familiar with. I'm not going to know until I get there. But
sure.
I'm like, oh yeah, it's new.
Okay.
I may love this. I may hate this.
How about Troilus and Cressida? Timon of Athens?
No, we haven't gotten to Timon of Athens yet.
Okay, that'll be a really important one.
We haven't done Troilus and Cressida? No. We did Pericles, we did Cymbeline.
Okay.
But I'd seen those,
Sure.
so they weren't brand spanking new, but I'd never read them. I guess I'm not sure. I feel like we've hit most of the, for lack of a better word, the more famous. I feel like we're front loaded a little.
At this
And
point,
I'm sure I'm forgetting.
it would make sense to
something.
front load it to keep people committed and keep them enthused and
there's a little bit of
slowly introduce them to the more obscure pieces,
the more
that
obscure
are lesser
pieces.
known.
And I give him credit because, as I was saying, it's mostly based on whatever choices were made for the Riverside ordering, but then moving certain things so that they were date appropriate to something going on in the play. 12th Night, Julius Caesar. And then I think 1 or 2 more had been moved just so that a pattern would be broken. So it wouldn't be dark for months, or just comedy, like it sprinkling in something else of whatever you're doing. I'm wondering if that may be why the Henry IVs were broken up from Henry V, is to put stuff in the middle. But it also seems like a huge break because we hadn't gotten to it yet, and those were early.
Stratfordian dating, I'd be curious to see the list and compare that to what you're saying about the Riverside. If it's a Stratfordian dating of the plays, then it's a really difficult series to follow because the Stratfordian dating is based mainly on what they can find as far as the stationer's registry and anybody's, anecdotal mentioning of the play or a performance of the play that they've come across that suits that narrative still as well, which is very important because if somebody mentions a play of a similar title, but it doesn't fit the narrative, they ignore that guy. They're like, oh no, he's talking about something else. He's not talking about the same play. And that's a problem with the dating in the plays, because I think some people, when they write about a play, maybe don't exactly remember the full title or the true title of the play.
No.
And they may get a word or a character name incorrect in describing the play. And that gets dismissed too easily by traditional scholars if it doesn't fit the narrative, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there are a couple of sources you can go to with regards to the dating of the plays. And I'll point a couple of them to you. One particularly is a book by Kevin Gilvari about dating Shakespeare's plays.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really good, insightful piece to look at. And then there are several others that have given various other dates of composition. And I think it's important to look at why they choose what they choose. Some of them, it's the style of writing. And I think anyone, including you, regardless of your intrigue with the Shakespeare authorship question or not, can read the canon. I'll bet this is what you're finding, is that as you read through the canon, you're going to rank these plays.
Absolutely.
And in some cases, you're ranking them by your personal preference.
Hmm.
Some of them as an actor, whether I'd like to play a role in them or not. But I think in others of them, it's just, oh, that's a really good play. And, oh, that's not so good.
Right.
And in some cases, yes, it is true. In some cases, Shakespeare wrote bad plays.
Yes.
Not everyone makes a hit out of he's not some idol on a pedestal that only wrote hits.
Right.
Some of them are really not good.
Yeah. I mean, I don't particularly care for Two Gentlemen of Verona, and I've seen it numerous times, and I've read it, and like, we read it again, and I'm like, yeah, I'm reminded why. I'm like, whatever, get out of here.
Yeah. Measure for Measure is a tough one.
Oh, we haven't gotten to that yet.
Okay, well, that'll be an interesting one.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, that's a tough one too.
Yeah.
All's Well That Ends Well is an Oxfordian favorite because it is so autobiographical.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a hit. And mainly because it's maybe too autobiographical, that it doesn't tell that entertaining story the same way that some of the other plays that are less autobiographical can do, because they're based on other source material or somebody else's work that was already fun or popular or good. So yeah, I think that then your brain just inevitably goes to, well, these plays that aren't as good may have been written sooner or earlier than these plays that are so good.
Right. We kind of operate under the assumption that you get better with practice.
Not always, because some bands put out a second album that flops. So, so there are exceptions to that rule. But I think generally most artists of any kind improve with the more experience and the more work that they do.
Yes.
And so I'm curious that how if I were to ask you a timeline, which of these four plays was written earliest?
Mm-hmm.
Would it be Hamlet, Macbeth, Love's Labour's Lost, or Antony and Cleopatra?
Ooh.
Which one is the earliest of those four works?
I guess I would probably say Love's Labour's Lost.
I think I would agree.
But I can also dissect my own brain that it is the one that I am the least familiar with. I've read it the once, the other three I've been in. So I can immediately conjure up more of my experience with them even now, because then I would put Antony and Cleopatra. And then I can't decide between Macbeth and Hamlet. And honestly, that's just me ranking my familiarity with the plays.
And we've had many scholars on this program, and some who are really familiar with Love's Labour's Lost, who will say, well, we can date Love's Labour's Lost to this specific date because of these references in the play that could not have happened until this historical thing happened, in which case that would throw off certain timelines.
Yes.
So then that puts you in a place where, okay, then he just had a bad year,
right,
with that play. Because, okay, no, it's not the earliest, but it's definitely not his best effort.
Right.
Or it was so important to him to make these political statements or include these references to these scenarios that the quality suffered in order to make the point or to send the message.
And I think people aren't taking into account that it's not, while it was, in fact, a different time, they had different purposes. I mean, they weren't necessarily all coming from the same drive, the same impetus. I mean, to me, there's certain things, and of course, like, I can't, it might have been Love's Labor's Lost. No, I didn't care for that. I can't remember which one it was because it was about a month ago. We were going something. I was like, oh, this really feels to me like someone who's good at what they're doing, playing with an idea more so than writing about like something that is deeply passionately held, as opposed to
experimental art in a sense.
Yes, there have been numerous times like, oh, this is like, I can detect what I feel to be a writer playing with a concept, an idea, a trope, something. And that seems perfectly normal to me. And these were commercial entities.
So kind of like a chef who's going, oh, I've discovered this new spice and I want to try it in this recipe. And
or
he's
I know
like, that's yummy. Or throw that, give that to the dogs.
Get that out of here.
Never do that.
Here's this, newly imported dish from Italy that everyone's talking about. I'm going to try and make one of those.
And not succeed always.
Yeah.
Sure. Too much heat or not enough yeast or whatever.
Yep.
Well, that's important. So here, before we wrap up, the next question I want to ask you that I'd like to have some insight into, and then I'm going to piggyback on this because you'll see where I'm going, is what research do you do on each piece prior to the reading?
Prior to the reading, well, it depends on how much notice I have, but I like to, well, we were talking about this recently, that I'm a huge fan of Asimov's Guide to Shakespeare.
Me too.
So honestly, that's usually my kicking off point, is that I will read that, and then I will start going through the footnotes available in whatever version I'm looking at. Again,
the annotations.
The annotations, thank you. Depending upon the amount of time for preparation, look at the different versions that are available, see what changes, what's different, and then depending upon the role, look into what have other people done with it. But I can't even necessarily say what it is that motivates me one character to the next, because when we did Macbeth, I didn't want to be influenced by anything else out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I just sat down. Now, to be fair, I had played Macduff years before, so I had familiarity and affinity for the play. So I sat down and I just like, okay, based on the brief conversations we'd had at that point, knowing the thoughts that you had shared with me at that point, just trying to continually go over the script we were using, keeping that lens in mind. Then flash forward to Hamlet, I was the exact opposite. Like, I tried to consume as much as I could. I read every version. I read, critical commentary. I read academic. I watched as many versions of other actors doing it until I was like, I can't watch another version.
Please, no more Hamlets.
I have to stop.
Well, there's some really bad ones out there. So,
yes.
Like the Ethan Hawke one is just
the Ethan Hawke one
intolerable.
is intolerable. I know it's probably apocryphal, but I'm not a huge. I think Kenneth Branagh's version is gorgeous,
but I'm not a fan of his personification.
Yeah, it's a bunch of talking. To me, it's the thing that I think makes me sad, because so I've been an actor. I decided I wanted to pursue acting when I was 16 years old, but I didn't start developing an affinity for Shakespeare until I was in college, because I finally had someone who made an attempt to make it accessible. Yes, the language is challenging by our standards, by the way that we, for lack of a better term, conduct English. But it's not a foreign language. And in high school, and up till that teacher, it's putting everything on a pedestal, as opposed to look at the story, look at these people having these problems. And yes, they have some of the most beautiful language ever written to express it, but they're still
human problems.
They're still human problems. Even
Sure.
in human, I mean, that's the reality is like we anthropomorphize everything. They're all human stories, even if they're not human characters. I mean, Oberon is a very human
But he's a
character,
demigod.
But he's a demigod.
Mm-hmm.
So once there was that, like, unlocking the door at the base of the ivory tower that exists prior to
phrase.
that.
That's a great phrase and great imagery. That's very Shakespearean of you.
It's finally been seeping in, I guess. But once I was past that phase, I was like, oh, yes, you have to work a little harder to get to absorb the language. But the ideas are so accessible. So you just have to get over that fear, I think, of the language. And then once you do that, it becomes much more accessible. The thing that always drove me nuts, so I think high schoolers across the nation are bored out of their minds by Shakespeare's, because it's presented from the top of that ivory tower. And it's these beautiful, mellifluous voices speaking words that don't have that human connection. And again, like I've said this for years, I much prefer Zeffirelli's Hamlet, which happens to star Mel Gibson.
Yes,
Because
and a lot of people don't know that was Franco Zeffirelli.
And that's the thing, because yes, perhaps he was too famous, perhaps he was too old, all of those things, but he really seemed like a guy with a problem that was eating him.
Well, he had a magnificent director to help guide him through that story, and that I think that's oftentimes the crucial connection.
Yeah,
I watched Cumberbatch's Hamlet, and I didn't like it at all.
right. And you and I disagree on that. Like, I enjoyed it. I had problems with it, but I enjoyed it. And that was actually at the time that's what kicked off my research.
Sure. So what I want to do is I'm going to turn you on to a book by an author named William Farina. And I'm going to pull it. I can probably do that right here from where I'm sitting. Pull it off of my shelf here in my illustrious quote unquote studio. Can you see it there somewhere? Bill Farina. It's Shakespeare from an Oxford Perspective, I believe is the title. I could be messing up the title, but I'll find it for you.
Yeah, we don't have to bore the listeners with us staring at your bookshelves.
They've heard me mention it before, but I would like to get the title right so people can find it. But the author's name is William Farina, and I believe it's Shakespeare from an Oxfordian Perspective. And it's a very easy book to read. It's very accessible. It's like Asimov's book, where there's a chapter on each of the plays. And all it does is explain what part of his life is in that play and why his life is autobiographically referenced in the work. And I think that from an actor's perspective, learning that, reading that, seeing that, whoever's name you put there, put anybody's name there. If you just read Bill Farina's work and it says, and you just substituted any name for the author. The author had this life and the author did this and the author did that. And here's where you see that reflected in this work. I think that brings an insight to the work in ways that nothing else can, is understanding the biography of the creator of the work. And I think that's true about every famous writer. I think it's true about famous artists. I think it's true about famous actors. I think when you know their history, you know their life, you have a greater understanding of the impetus behind the art. And so I'm gonna get that book for you
All
as
right.
you continue your journey through the canon. And
Got
I'll be
another
curious to see. And it's
5 months to go.
and it's quick reads. It's 10, 15 minutes per piece.
Mhm.
So like I said, it's very much Asimov's sections are actually larger and a much bigger book. Asimov's book is a pretty thick book.
Yes, it is.
So he goes on and on about some of them
Yes.
in great detail, which I love. I love his details, and I love
And I
what
love
he
how
has to
they're
say.
so different. Like he's operating under the assumption that, like, yes, here are all the things everyone else is going to tell you. You can get 400 variations.
Right.
Here are the things that I find interesting that other people don't talk about.
Right.
Which is why I was fascinated and kind of annoyed at myself that I wasn't fortunate enough to have been introduced to it earlier, because I just started eating it up. I'm like, oh, this is fascinating. I mean, I've liked Asimov for quite some time, and it was funny because I read some of his science fiction when I was much younger, and then somebody handed me the Asimov's Guide to Shakespeare. I'm like, wait, same name, same guy? What? That's not right. He read science. Oh
Same
my.
guy.
Yeah,
Same guy.
just a polymath.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
how it works. So, what I was going to get at is I want you to be able to spend that like 10, 15 minutes. What's it cost to you but 10, 15 minutes of research you're already going to do on this play before you read it next anyway, and just see if it changes any perspective or enhances your ability to enjoy the text. And then we'll talk again later about how that plays out for you.
All right.
But I'll make sure to get you that book. And I'm sorry that the title is escaping me right now, but I will find it. And ladies and gentlemen listening, if you'd like to find it, the author's name is William Farina, Farina. And if you Google that, I'm sure you'll find the book. You could Google that and then Google Oxford. Type in William Farina, Oxford, you'll find it. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, Chris. Thank you for joining me today on this episode and sharing your experience. I am thrilled to hear about your journey through the canon. I think that everyone should take their own journey through the canon, and I think that they should look into all of the different meanings and different theories and different questions that surround each of these plays. And the poems as well. Mm-hmm. I think it's great that this list includes the poems, including the more obscure poems like Passionate Pilgrim and Phoenix and Turtle. I hope you'll do some additional looking into some of those, because I think that they're fascinating on their own, in their own right. Mm-hmm. And I'll be curious to see how you feel about that. And when you read Venus and Adonis again, take a look, think about that as a 3-person play, because I think that it really brings it to life in a different way.
All right, we'll give it a shot.
Now, we'd like to remind you that if you have not already, you need to, right this very minute, go to your podcast provider, your podcast streaming site, and where you can, give us a rate and review. Give us all the stars you possibly can, and write us a quick little review. Nothing too long, just something that says how much you enjoy the program. And encourage people to tune in and find your favorite episodes. We're now approaching, I know we're over 40 episodes, I believe, at this point. So there's quite a library there for you to choose from. And if you haven't gone back and chosen some of the earlier episodes to stream and listen to, please do that and give them a review as well, so that we can develop sort of our top 10, as it were, as we continue this program. Don't forget, we are sponsored by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org is your source and resource for everything you'd like to know about the Shakespeare authorship question and so much more. Get your Quiller swag. Won't you be a fellow Quiller? I drink coffee out of my Don't Quill the Messenger coffee mug, and I'm always proud to wear my Don't Quill logo t-shirt. You can find that merchandise on the Dragon Wagon Radio site, dragonwagonradio.com. Go to the swag shop and get your swag on at Dragon. We would love to see your support. It's such a great way to share this with others when they say, hey, what's that? And you can become an Obnoxfordian, as my friend Earl Showerman is fond of saying. Always remember, join us here every other week for a new podcast, and keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.